telling the South Carolina story because I do think it's a compelling story. Yes, sir.
Governor, in your statement, you talk about the tough decisions that South Carolina families are facing. If the $700 million isn't used in the state budget over the next 2 years, it's going to mean job losses. How do you tell those families that would deal with the loss of a state job that a decision to pay down a debt that needs to be repaid in 30 years is more important than weathering the storm for the next 2 years?
One, I disagree with the hypothesis. There are lots of different ways of reforming, cutting government, changing government that in fact can lead to job growth in our state. I think that if we're at the number that we're at, which is, again, it's been long debated in different ways of cutting into the apple, but if we're at about 130% of the U.S. average in the cost of our state government for those state governments, one could argue that some of those restructurings would in fact produce job growth on the private side. So I guess I would take exception with it. I mean, what you're doing is you're buying the notion of if we just print some more money that we don't have, send it to different states, we'll create jobs. If that's the case, then why isn't Zimbabwe a rich place?
Why can't state government use that?
Well, I'm just asking. Why isn't I mean, they went the exact same route. Why isn't Zimbabwe just an incredibly prosperous place? Because they're printing money they don't have to send around their different, I don't know the towns in Zimbabwe, but that same logic is being applied there with little effect.
I mean, why can't the next 2 years be used to implement some of those restructurings that you talk about in preparation for what's going to come in 2011?
Because I've been in politics for 15 years now, and what I have seen over and over and over again is always been wrong. In other words, this year we're going to do this, and then next year the deficit's going to disappear. In fact, we're told at the federal level the deficit's going to disappear, in essence disappear next year based on the assumption that the economy is going to grow by 3.2%. Now, who believes the economy is going to grow at the federal level by 3.2%? Not many economists that I've talked to, but that's the projection that drives the number that says, okay, it'll disappear. So what I have come to the conclusion of, having been something of a student of this over the last 15 years, is the year that you have is the year that you have. And the projections about, debts disappearing, deficits disappearing, annualization holes disappearing, generally don't seem to pan out. And I think that therefore you try and make the most responsible call that you can based on what's before you, and then you deal with tomorrow morning.
So but who's saying in South Carolina that those things are going to disappear?
Which things will disappear?
That the debt is going to disappear that 2 years from now.
The question is, should we add to it about 1.2 billion? And I'm saying no, and you might say yes.
Governor, based on some of the feedback that I've read about your ideas here, there's a great deal of anger out there and frustration that people say you're dealing in abstractions while they are literally standing on the unemployment line. Do you feel that you're in touch with what those people are experiencing right now?
I was just in Spartanburg, and there were Republicans and Democrats, there were blacks and whites there very much concurring with where we were coming from. And so, come on with me to Charleston. I'm going to Charleston next. And let's wander through Somerville. And you tell me, after the end of the visits, whether or not you think I got an accurate read on what, again, the majority of people, I believe, think with regard to the state is like.
You do one or two more?
How much?
I'll come to you. Yes.
How much of the stimulus money that was passed in the House budget this week would you reject or spend in a different way?
Again, our cuts is 75-25. And again, we're not alone in that. I mean, I think it's interesting that Glenn McConnell agreed. I think that David Thomas agreed with our take and legal counsel's take on the cuts that they have. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, what is your plan to create jobs in the economy?
What I just talked about. It's a combination of outright recruitment, and so on a daily basis, both the Department of Commerce and within the administration, folks are trying to tell the South Carolina story, combined with constantly working to try and get the soil conditions better for businesses, whether they're big, medium, or small in size or scale. The most recent dust up on that very front has been the dust up on workers' comp, which I think ultimately is a competitiveness issue. Because if you don't have a sustainable funding source there, such that you're going back to the business community and to the working of the state, I think you harm the underlying business conditions for the state. Excuse me.
Why not tell the cabinet agencies that they should not accept the stimulus money?
Or spend it?
I think that's, you know, again, you're trying, one, you got program funding. So look at Title I funding. Title I funding doesn't go to this office. Title I funding goes to the most needy, going back to the question that was raised, I guess, by you on the, you know, Dillon School District, goes to the most needy school districts in this state. It doesn't come to the governor's office. I suppose we could do some kind of court injunction or something trying to block it, but it would be fairly bizarre from the standpoint of gubernatorial prerogative to try and block the normal fund flow based on statute that's passed by the United States Congress on the way that those funds ought to flow. And so our take is we leave alone program funding. We impact the 25% that every other governor, it's not by coincidence that every other governor is trying to impact the 25%, which is why they set up these councils on the spending itself. And you know, you lay out your proposal, which we've done.
But haven't you asked the president to do the same thing, to trump Congress's intention for the money?
No, because again, legal counsel, we take a very broad interpretation of what fiscal stimulus, it's called fiscal stimulus. You know, what we think, there's nothing more fiscal than the underlying debt load of the state and the promises that have been made but not paid for. And so it's our take that that would be the best use of fiscal stimulus. Other people could have different takes.
Got anything else?
Governor, you've been accused of posturing by making this stand. I mean, how do you respond to that?
It does seem to be a very good political move, and I know you take umbrage at the description of your motives, actions as political.
Sure.
But you get to do something here with the stimulus that really washes your hands in making a decision on that money.
With all due respect, a couple different thoughts. One, and I wrote this in the bottom of the letter that I sent to state legislators. Was that what I guessed? Yes. For a lot of different reasons, I would rather skip on this one. You know, chief among them, in other words, I'm not going to be the one who has to deal with the annualization hole that exists. It comes in 24 months, and I'm done in 18 months. So, in a lot of ways, it would be far easier not to deal with this. Folks are constantly in the business of assigning motives. I get that. It'd be far easier not to deal with that. But, you know, I got a 15-year pattern of doing exactly this kind of thing. I mean, you can go back to my freshman days in the United States Congress, and I was taking the same kind of stance with regard to fiscal issues. So I would agree with you, John. You know, it might be posturing if it was something new. But if you got a 15-year history of doing exactly kind of thing, maybe it's just sort of in the DNA and tied to what I'm hearing from the people that I represent and people across the state of South Carolina.
How much thought did you
Last thought, and we're going to call it quits. Yes, ma'am.
How much thought did you give to not taking this money?
A lot. Which is why you end up reading through a 3-page letter. I don't know if you're in TV world, so you probably didn't have to put up with reading the 3-page letter. But I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking because, you know, at one level, let's be clear. I am in the last 18 months. And so all the pragmatists from the offices, we went back and forth on this thing and said, look, the much more practical, easy decision is just to take the money. I'm looking at the chief of staff back there, who's one of them arguing, and others, not to pick names out, but anyway. But I said, look, you know, I've been doing this stuff for 15 years. I'm now at the last year and a half. I don't want to just go counter every other decision, in words, along these lines that I've made over 15 years. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And we spent a lot of time debating at that table right over there, which is what we believe in the Socratic process. We sit around the table, we argue until we get sick with each other, and then we come back and argue some more. And this is where we've wound up, because I go back to the simple reality that I couldn't get comfortable with at a gut level in going the other routes that we're contemplating. And that was, fundamentally, I do not believe that it makes sense to spend money that you don't have. And that's true at an individual level, at a corporate level, and most certainly at a governmental level. Thank you all, appreciate it.